Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dissecting the Truth, Case Files Uncovered. In today's episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different because it was highly requested from the last video. So instead of just sitting here and talking to you guys about the case, I'm going to talk about the case whilst also doing my makeup. I want to say a massive thank you for all the love and support and messages that I received from the last video that I did. It honestly, it just made my whole day. So thank you very much. So for the case that we're talking about today, we're going to be talking about the West Memphis 3 case. Now this case truly left me with more questions than answers. It's one of those cases that it is unsolved but solved. It's just very confusing. So I'm going to stop rambling and I'm going to start today's video. I'm so excited. So the West Memphis 3 included up of 3 people. There was 18-year-old Damien Eccles, 17-year-old Jesse Miss Kelly Jr. and 16-year-old Jason Baldwin. The 3 all lived in the town of West Memphis, and this town was extremely conservative, very Christian. There has actually been several movies made about the West Memphis 3, which I'm not really surprised. It is very popular in Hollywood. I'm just going to go in a little bit about the background of the 3 boys because I feel like their upbringing, the way that the community had looked at the 3 boys, especially Damien, had a lot to do with why they were actually convicted in the first place, especially Damien. So Damien was born on the 11th of December 1974. His parents was Pam Eccles and Joe Hutchinson. Damien nowadays would be considered an emo. He only wore black, he listened to death metal, he always spoke about Satan, and because of this, he was considered an outcast in the community. At the time that this had happened, Damien was actually already on probation because there was an incident that happened in 1992 where he ran away with a girlfriend, and when he was found, they were both found partially naked. He also had charges of burglary and sexual misconduct as well. So he was in trouble with the law quite regularly. He also told a minister at a church that he had a pact with Satan. So it's not a good start for him. At a young age, Damien had struggled a lot with anxiety and depression. He had actually been admitted to a psych ward before all of this had happened. It is said that he had psychotic behaviors, and there was one incident where he had actually turned around to a social worker and said that he was going to be the next Charles Manson or Ted Bundy. Jason Baldwin was born on the 11th of April 1997. I couldn't actually find who his parents were, and I couldn't find anything about his background. It's strange because the only person's background that I could really get a good idea of was actually Damien. So I'm not sure why I couldn't find a background on any of the other boys, but yeah, I couldn't find anything about Jason. Jesse Miss Kelly Jr. was born on the 10th of July 1975. The only parent that I could find was his dad, which was Jesse Miss Kelly Sr. The only criminal record that I could find on Jesse was a assault charge, and I forgot to mention this. The only criminal record I could find on Jason was a stealing offense. So like I said, unlike Damien, I could not find anything on either Jason or Jesse, which is strange, but Damien was in this case, the leader, I guess you could say. So now let's get on to the 5th of May 1993. 3 8-year-old boys were found dead in Robin Hood Hills in West Memphis. They had all been brutally murdered, and their dead bodies were left naked lying on the forest floor. The 3 boys' names were Stevie Edward Branch. He was born on November 26, 1984. The second boy was Christopher Mark Byers. He was born on June 23rd, 1984. And the last boy was James Michael Moore. He was born on July 27th, 1984. The 3 boys were all best friends, and they were even all in Cub Scouts. The Robin Hood Hills, where the boys' body were found, was actually a place that the 3 boys used to hang out quite frequently. The day that the boys went missing, they were last seen at 6:30, but they weren't actually reported missing until 8 p.m. that night. They had told their parents that they were going to go and play in the Robin Hood Hills, and that was the last that the parents had heard of them. It is speculated that the boys were murdered between 6:30 and 8 p.m. that night. Once the boys were reported missing, all the families and everyone in the neighborhood got together and they were frantically searching for these little boys. The police were eventually notified, but they didn't actually start an official search until the next day. On May 6th, the official search for the 3 boys went underway, and they started in the Robin Hood Hills, which was the last location that the boys were suspected of being in because they had only told their parents that they were going there. When they were searching the Robin Hood Hills, this is when a patrol officer called Steve Jones saw a snake out lying in the creek. He went down into the creek, and this is when he got his leg caught on one of the boys' deceased's body. This was the unfortunate beginning of discovering all of the 3 boys' body. Michael Moore was found at the bottom of the stream. Stevie Branch was found not too far from Michael, but he was like near some trees. And Christopher Byers was found just below the stream. They were all found naked. All of the boys' clothing were actually scattered everywhere on the forest floor, and they were all tied up by their shoelaces, but all the knots were tied differently, which this is what made police think that there was actually more than one person involved in the murdering of the 3 boys. From what the police could see, Chris Byers actually had the worst visible injuries. He had injuries to his groin. He also had damage to his genital and several other lacerations to his body. His official cause of death was knife injuries. Now, Stevie and Michael's official cause of death was drowning. Police did actually do a luminal, I think that's how you say, test on the ground to see if there was any drag marks, and it came up with nothing. From this, the police had come up with the idea that the boys had been killed in the exact spot where their bodies were actually found, because there was no drag marks of blood found anywhere on the forest floor. The police then unfortunately had to tell the families of the 3 boys what they had found, and in the video that I watched, it's actually quite heartbreaking. One of the mothers, when she found out about her son, had collapsed to the ground. The community started to believe that this was some satanic ritual, which when I read this, it didn't surprise me because, like I said before, it was a very Christian community, and nothing like this had ever happened before. So it was strange that something like this had happened. They also thought that it was a Satan ritual due to the mutilation to Chris's genitals. When the police did search the area, they didn't actually find any like symbols to suggest that it had anything to do with a satanic ritual. So in my mind, that should have been ruled out quite quickly, but it was still sitting very close on the investigators' minds. There were also marks left on the 3 boys' bodies which were identical to turtle bites. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because where the boys' bodies were found, there's actually a type of turtle that is in that river. Now, there was actually a test done to see if these bites did actually come from turtles, and it was actually proven that the bites were from these turtles. And they believed that the turtles were actually attacking the boys' bodies after they had died. Now, people started coming forward on who they thought could have killed the boys, and a person's name was actually dropped into the police, and this person's name was Damien Eccles. Now, like I said, the community 110% thought that this was a satanic ritual, and Damien Eccles fitted perfectly into their portfolio. Someone came forward to the police and gave Damien Eccles' name to them. This person was actually the aunt of Damien's girlfriend at the time. Her name was Narlene Hollingsworth. And she had actually told police that she saw Damien Eccles near the crime scene around 9 p.m. covered in mud. Now, this could be hearsay, but the police had to take this into consideration at the time. Damien had a severe past of mental illness. He was so mentally ill that he actually wasn't fit to work, and he had applied for a social security disability. He also described himself as homicidal, suicidal, manic depressive, schizophrenic, and sociopathic. But his mental health record was massive. It actually had over 500 pages long. And in 1992, like I said, he was admitted to a psychiatric ward by court order. His parents had expressed their worry for their son, who they thought was involved in witchcraft at that point in time. He also had a record of being violent at school. So there was one incident where he was in detention, and one of the boys that he was in detention with had actually cut himself, and Damien apparently had grabbed his arm and started sucking his blood. Damien did say that that night he had an alibi, which ended up not holding up in court. He had said that he had spoken to multiple girlfriends that night, and a lot of them had come back and said they hadn't spoken to him. And police also questioned his grandmother, and his grandmother said that the last time that she had seen Damien was actually at 8 p.m. that night. Police had actually asked him what he thought the murderer would have felt during this time, and Damien's response was yes, definitely very strange. But in saying that, I don't understand why the police asked this, or why police officers ask this when interrogating people. I don't see the relevance in that at all. But he was asked this question, and Damien had turned around and said that he probably felt good at the time committing these murders, and he said that whoever had did this probably felt good at what he had done and felt like he had power. Damien also stated that the kids would go into the woods quite often, and that they weren't very big and they weren't smart, and that the murderer probably knew this, and they knew that they would have power over the three boys. He also said that the murderer probably didn't care about killing the boys in the woods because he knew that no one would be able to hear the boys screaming. The police decided way too soon that he was guilty, and at the time there was a lot of pressure from the community to convict someone. I personally believe that the police got one good tip-off about a boy that might have been involved and was like, yep, he's our person. He's the person that we're going to target and we're going to make guilty. The next person they brought in for questioning was Jesse Kelly. Jesse Kelly actually had a really low IQ, which I probably should have mentioned beforehand, but yeah, police should have taken this into consideration before interrogating him. But either way, Jesse was interrogated and his story was all over the place. He was interrogated for 12 hours, but only 41 minutes of the interrogation was actually recorded, which is suspicious. It only took a few hours for Jesse Kelly to make a formal confession. He had done a polygraph test, which his father said that he could do, and he had actually failed the polygraph test. A lot of people believe that Jesse just started making things up, and this was actually shown in his confession because things kept changing over and over again. So it was very obvious that he was either confused or he was just making it up. In the confession, he said, quote, "When I was there, I saw Damien hit this one. He hit this one real bad. And then he started screwing them and stuff." End quote. The police showed Jesse 3 different photos, and on each photo was one of the boys. And Jesse had actually pointed at Michael Moore, and he said that this was the boy that Damien was screwing and hitting really bad. So the boy that he pointed at, he thought was Michael Moore, but it actually wasn't. It was Christopher Byers. This alone shows that Jesse was highly confused. He didn't even know what boy was being brutally attacked by Damien. He then went on to say that Damien had hit him with his fist and bruised him all up real bad, and then that's when Jason Baldwin came in, and that's when he started to hit Stevie Branch, and he started doing the exact same things. Michael Moore ended up running off, and this is when Jesse took off after him, held him until the two boys got to him. On page 11 of his confession, he had turned around and said that the boys were murdered at noon, which couldn't have been possible because the boys were at school at noon. So, again, this doesn't make any sense. But what is more suspicious about this story not adding up is the fact that Jesse Misskelley had actually had a solid alibi. He was actually seen multiple times at a wrestling match by multiple eyewitnesses, and this wrestling match was in another town, so he could not have been able to do these murders at the time that the boys had died. Now, all three boys were taken into police custody despite there having no strong hard evidence besides this wonky confession that Jesse Misskelley had given them. The police's transcript also had a lot of evidence that they were trying to coach a confession out of Jesse. Jesse had actually came out a little bit later and said he felt coerced by the police to give a confession. Police made him feel guilty. The only thing that connects the other two boys, so Damien and Jason, to the murder of the three 8-year-old boys was Jesse's confession. There was no hard evidence that any of these boys had committed this crime. But on August 4th, they were all found guilty of the murder, despite all three of them pleading not guilty. Jason and Jesse were sentenced to life in prison, and Damien Eccles was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The trial, multiple people took the stand, but later on, they had actually turned around and said that what they had said on the stand were all lies. In particular, there was this one guy that shared a jail cell with Jason, and apparently Jason had confessed the crime, and he went into descriptive detail of how he had apparently killed these boys. The man did end up coming out later and said that what he had said on the stand was a lie, and it was actually an illusion that he felt was real. He has since apologized for what he had done. A lot of people, including celebrities, believe that all three of these boys are innocent, and there is also a campaign called Free West Memphis 3. In 1996, 1997, and 1999, the boys were all denied a retrial. But November 4th, 2011, the state Supreme Court unanimously ordered a new circuit court evidentiary hearing for the three boys. They organised a hearing, and in a rare plea agreement, which is called an Alford plea, the boys were finally released from prison after serving 18 years. So an Alford plea is where the convicted pleads guilty whilst also maintaining their innocence. The boys had spent 18 years in jail, and Damien Eccles had spent 18 years in death row. He was almost killed for a crime that he was wrongly convicted on. To this day, the case of the three 8-year-old boys who were brutally murdered in 1993 has left millions of people with questions, including myself. There is no hard evidence to convict anyone of the crimes, and so the killer of Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, and Christopher Byers is unknown. There are a few other suspects who I'm going to be listing next. The first suspect is Mark Byers, who is the father of Christopher Byers. He was also considered a suspicious suspect by the community. On the victim, there was a bite mark, and when the boys were discovered, he got all his teeth removed and then replaced. So his teeth were completely different. His wife also randomly died from an unknown cause, which police believe Mark had something to do with. Now, the other suspect is actually Stevie Brandt's stepfather. Now, in 2007, they actually found DNA evidence that directly linked Terry Hobbs to the crime scene. On one of the shoelaces that Michael Moore was tied up with, there was a hair follicle that was found, and when tested against Terry Hobbs' DNA, it was an identical match. Now, if this was found on Stevie Branch's shoelace, then this might have been a little less suspicious, but the fact that it was found on Michael Moore, who had nothing to do with Terry to begin with, it was deemed quite suspicious by the community. Someone had gone to Terry Hobbs' house and had questioned him about this, and the reason they did this is because they needed to get DNA evidence directly from Terry Hobbs to this hair follicle. So they had found a cigarette butt, and like I said, when it was tested, it was a match. Terry Hobbs was the last person to also see any of the boys alive, and it also has been said that Stevie was absolutely terrified of his stepfather, and so was his sister. Now, his sister believes that Terry had actually sexually molested her as a child, and the reason she thinks this is because she can't recall anything about her childhood, and she believes that is because she's been traumatized. Now, she also believes that this is the reason that she turned to drugs. There was a woman called Mildred French who used to live near Terry when they were younger, and there was one incident where Terry had walked into her house unannounced, and Mildred was actually in the bath, and Terry just walked up to her bathroom, and she obviously was screaming and yelling and telling him to get out, and he was shushing her. And at one point he had grabbed her breast and she went wild, and at this point he knew that she was not going to be quiet, so he ran off. Now, this was reported to police as well. He also has a past of aggravated assault against his brother, and he is described to be a very angry person. He was always angry towards his wife, and he would beat her constantly due to the fact that he was jealous that Stevie and his siblings would receive more attention from her than he would from his wife. There are also reports that Terry had held Stevie by his hair and lifted him above the ground. There are reports again that Stevie was the victim of abuse from his stepfather. Mark Byers also believes that Terry is the real murderer in this case, and on multiple occasions he has actually called Terry a baby killer. There is more evidence that Terry had committed this crime than what there is on any of the three boys, and I don't understand why he wasn't investigated by the police. Like I said, the police got wind of one person's name, and then another person, and then another person, and then a not so strong confession was given, and the police ran with it. The police should have done more digging. They should not have convicted these boys of a crime before there was any hard evidence towards them. Now, that is the case of the West Memphis 3. I'm very sorry if this is all over the place. It's a little bit hard to read from a script and do your makeup at the same time, but I am going to hopefully get better at it. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this case, and let me know down below who you think the real murderer is, and also leave down below your case suggestions. Next week's case is going to be the case of Becky Watts, which is an absolutely horrible case. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye guys.